Good morning from Blair Atholl, or more specifically Old Blair, which is just up the road from Blair Atholl. People might be familiar with Blair Atholl. It's the one with the big white castle, Blair Castle, which you can see from the A9. The famous castle where famously the Duke of Atholl could raise his own army, and it was the last castle in Britain to be besieged in 1746 by the Jacobites. Glen Tilt, one of my favourite glens. It's quite a narrow glen. It stretches for 11-12 miles all the way from Blair Atholl into the Cairngorms. It kind of terminates at a place called Falls of Tarf before the path climbs up onto the southern flanks of the Cairngorms, I suppose, and that takes you all the way to Braemar if you really wanted to go the whole hog, which I'm not doing today. I'm only going to the Falls of Tarf, but it's a very, very long walk, 11-12 miles each way, so as you can see, it's shorts weather, which means it's bikes. It's biking time. Not a bike and hike today, just a bike. As you can see, it starts gentle enough. Wooded, quite lowland in character, but before long you do head up and you really feel like you're in the hills. It gets a bit more bleak and barren and remote, isolated. As you can see, it's very pretty, and understandably, when tourism was kicking off, when Queen Victoria was doing her thing, it's not surprising that they all came here. Queen Victoria you associate with the Cairngorms and Balmoral over that side on the D side, but she did come out here apparently with her grand tours. She came up Glen Tilt, apparently with a piper or something who had to pipe her all the way up, even when they were crossing burns and rivers, fording rivers down to his waist. Apparently he still had to keep piping. Don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds great. But this is pretty much the last bit of forest before the glen opens up. Come about 4 or 5 kilometres, not much, but making steady progress up the glen, but I thought I'd stop for a sandwich. This is Gilbert's Bridge, and as I say, the river's a companion the whole length of the trip, and you end up crossing the Tilt again and again via different bridges, such as this one. You don't get really a sense of how ornate and beautiful they are from being on them, of course. Oh, some beautiful ferns clinging on here. Oh, I forget what it's called. Is it spleenwort? Is it maiden something spleenwort? I forget. I used to know what that was. Very, very beautiful fern growing in bizarre places. It's very still today, and you think there might be a problem with midges, but there don't seem to be any around here at the moment. That's part of the reason I chose to ride today, is because I decided a few years ago I can't be doing with walking, hill walking in summer, with all the midges and clegs and ticks and humidity and sunburn and all those things which aren't very kind to someone with a fair complexion such as myself. So I thought biking would probably be a good way to do Glen Tilt today. Keeping on the move, keeping away from midges, and always getting a breeze so you can cool down a bit. Biking in summer, and I'll wait until the snows return in autumn before I start getting out on my feet again. And all of a sudden we're out into the open, and this is the way it will stay pretty much. Fewer and fewer trees as you get further up the glen. Now this cottage here is called Marble Lodge, and I don't know whether it's called that because it used to be quarried here. Seems logical, but it did used to be quarried here, marble. So it's a type of limestone, I forget. Anyway, somewhere around here it was quarried, and I'm assuming that's why this is called Marble Lodge. And up ahead now you've got Benaglow, at least one of the hills that makes up Benaglow, which is a big massive, it's numerous tops, 3 Munros, and that's my anniversary hill. That's one of my favourite hills. It's the one that I do on the same weekend pretty much every year. first big, wonderful, wild feeling walk I did when I moved up to Scotland in 2003. And so I do it on the same weekend every year, just to mark it, celebrate it, and remind myself not to take this wonderful place for granted. I hope that a video like this shows that as long as you're moderately fit and you've got a bike, this isn't hilly by any, this isn't really hilly, it's fairly flat, there's a few ups. Most of it's down on the way back. But I just hope it shows how accessible some of Scotland's remote and beautiful areas really are. I haven't even been cycling an hour yet and I'm already getting deep into the Cairngorms. Within reach of most of us in the summer months. So I do recommend people give it a go. Now I'm quite familiar with this. I think this is called Glass, I forget, but this little house, I've got one of my favourite photos I've taken actually, I think since I've been in Scotland. Wonderfully moody shot when I was walking out of Glen Tilt. The sun was in front of me and looking this way, big black clouds. Very moody weather. Oh, look. Get out of the way. Move, sheep. Fancy living all the way out here? There is actually a more remote cottage way up that way. I didn't really know about until a couple of days ago. A lodge with painted pink apparently, but it's supposed to be the most remote inhabited house in Scotland. Well, this is an important spot in not just Scottish history, and certainly not just in the history of Glen Tilt, but international history too. This was where a chap called James Hutton came in the late 18th century. You might not have, probably haven't heard of James Hutton. You might have heard of him if you live in Edinburgh. If you've been to Arthur's Seat and you read any of the interpretation panels there, you might have heard of him. He was a geologist, he was a Scot, he spent a lot of time overseas before coming back home. Around Hutton's time, it was still the belief that the Earth was around 6,000 years old, and that was based on some calculation, some biblical calculation, and it was the assumption that anything that you saw, any sculptures, any valleys, anything like that, any massive events, massive scars on the landscape could only have been caused by events like the big flood, the Great Flood in the Bible. But then Hutton came along and argued that that wasn't the case, and that the processes that were shaping the world, not only had they happened a long time ago, they were actually still going now. Anyway, he came to Glen Tilt as part of his investigations and trying to gather evidence as to how the world was formed. And I think it was here, or it was certainly somewhere along this stretch where all these funny rocks are. He found very old rocks, and in those rocks he found a different kind of rock, and that was granite. And he deduced that it was the granite had oozed its way as magma millions and millions of years ago into existing rock, which is called the country rock, which is the metamorphic rock that was already there. But then he realised that if the granite had oozed into something, then the rocks into which it was oozing must have been older, and that helped him to form his calculations as to how old all of this was. And it was so radical what he was thinking, because he was the one who was suggesting that rocks were formed from molten material, and that's how the world was formed, whereas up to that point there was the established view that rocks were somehow precipitated out of water. There was some sort of leftover out of water, but so you can see what a radical departure it was. And it's just why he said, everywhere he looks we find no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. which is to say the world is very, very old and the processes that have shaped it are still going on now, and I don't know when they're going to end. They're going to be going on forever. Quite amazing really, that someone could just come up with these things, and it was done here. And so Glen Tilt plays a pivotal role in Scottish history and arguably modern geology and the thoughts and theories therein. But if you are in Edinburgh, go to Arthur's Seat and just read some of the panels at the foot of Salisbury Crags, and you can learn a lot about James Hutton. There's a very famous stretch of Salisbury Crags called Hutton's Section, where, in the same way I've just said about that granite, where he found another injection of magma into existing rock, and you can actually see how the rock that was existing there was being pulled backwards, and then it's solidified as it cooled, and it's still like that, and it's bent backwards by the magma that's been oozing in, and it's still there. You can see it. It's quite a wonderful place actually, when you know that it's formed such a pivotal role in how we perceive the natural world today. Anyway, it's enough about James Hutton. Need to be on our way. This whole estate, of course, is all one big estate. All this land. I've been pedalling for a long time now. I'm still on the Athol estate. 145,000 acres or something. It's opened up now. Long and remote as the glen is, even in its lower reaches, it's not really until you get up here, beyond that last plantation, that it starts to feel like you're really getting out into the wilds, I suppose. There's nothing else like that. No more settlements or plantations after here. It just gets wilder and wilder as you go into the Cairngorms, and as I say, eventually this path just becomes a single track, difficult to bike, and you go up over the higher land in the distance and you come out at the White Bridge over towards Linn of Dee, and you can walk all the way to Braemar, or you can turn north, go through the Larrig Grew and go on to Aviemore. Wonderful network of paths in the Cairngorms for exploring if you're feeling adventurous. Well, this is something of a personal milestone, because this is the furthest I've been up Glen Tilt in all my times up this glen. This is as far as I've come, and that's because Ben aglow, just see it through here. I usually come up over the three hills which you can't see over here, and I come down here and end up at this bridge, and then start the long walk back down the glen, which even today on the bike it feels like a long way. I can't really believe I used to walk that. My poor feet won't do it anymore. Oh, it's wonderful, isn't it? Right, off into the unknown. For me, anyway. Ooh, some hikers up ahead. I stopped and chatted to the two walkers over there who were backpacking. Backpacking, is that the right word? They were walking from Blair Athol to Braemar. So good luck to them. Quite a long way, but I gather the route's quite well marked from here. This is one of the most peaceful, beautiful places I've been in Scotland. Look at that. See all the way back down the upper reaches of the glen, all the way I've come down that track, you feel like you're at a great junction of different rights of way. And this is a right of way, this one, long used for centuries. And I think up that way, that's where I would have liked to have gone if I was a bit fitter and if I knew a bit more about my bike and if I knew how to maintain it a bit better. That's where it goes to Loch. Wonderful name. But this is the end of Ben essentially. It comes down here, that's it, and then the track goes around there, a few miles over that way and curves all the way back down to Blair Athol, doing a circumnavigation of Ben I'll do that at some point. But not today. The waterfall will do, then I'll go back. But isn't this just sublime? What a beautiful place. I think all of this exquisite scenery is just making me realise how little of Scotland I've actually seen. But seeing these things, it does make me realise how many of these, especially in the Cairngorms, how many of these far-flung glens I've not seen, and how many of these beautiful, quiet, remote places there are, especially in the parts of the Cairngorms where there are no Munros and you won't tend to see people. So much to explore. We're down to single track now to take us into this final stretch up to the Falls of Tarf. Oh, we're here. How about that? Isn't that beautiful? What a setting. It's not really what you expect to find in the middle of nowhere, a bridge like this, is it? But apparently crossing here was always a bit of a chore and a bit dangerous if it could be in spate, I suppose. It hasn't been raining, so it doesn't look very rough now. But there's a sign here that says, this bridge was erected in 1886 with funds contributed by his friends and others and the Scottish Rights of Way Society to commemorate the death of Francis John Bedford, aged 18, who was drowned near here on the 25th of August, 1879. So it seems a fitting memorial to have something that can actually cross and stop people from drowning. It's quite moving, really. Sit down. It's quite fitting that it should have been put here by the Scottish Rights of Way Society. Today you might know them as Scotways. You might have heard of that name, but they've been around for 180 years or so, I think, in various different forms. But again, Glen Tilt's played a pivotal role in another episode of Scottish history, an ongoing episode, I suppose, an ongoing story, that we have this wonderful access legislation these days, which means that I can come to places like this on my bike, just pedal tracks freely, or walk over the hills, enjoy all of this wonderful countryside. We take it for granted that we've got this access legislation, and it was cemented in law in 2003, was it, with the Land Reform Act in Scotland, which meant that you're free to go pretty much anywhere as long as you respect the fact that people are earning a living from the land. But that hasn't always been the case, and our access rights have been hard won. There's famous incidents in England of the Kinder trespass in the 1950s? 30s, 40s or 50s, I forget, somewhere around the interwar years, I think, that a load of people went and did a deliberate trespass in Derbyshire on Kinder Scout because they were claiming their right to roam. And the same kind of things have happened here in Scotland, and especially here in Glen Tilt. As you can see from the route I've come today, with the glen cutting as it does across pretty much the whole of the Cairngorms in between Braemar and Blair Athol, it's been a right of way for a very, very long time, and that's what people have been trying to assert over the centuries. They're trying to assert their right to use the paths and network of paths that their forefathers and their fathers before them and all that sort of stuff. All those people have used over the generations. It's been used for hundreds of years. Why not use them now? And anyway, it all came to a head in 1847, I think it was, when there was a professor of botany at Edinburgh University, John Balfour, who used to take his students on field trips to the Highlands to look at plants, presumably, and shrubs, that kind of thing. But I think they were coming down somewhere here, actually, to Tarf, when they were confronted by the Duke of Atholl and his gillies, and he wouldn't let them through. And that was a confrontation that led to quite a lengthy legal battle, I believe, which was part of a big, long saga over the decades following that of people trying to assert their rights of way across Scotland's countryside. And it was out of that, it was just before that, but it's pretty much, it's because of things like that that the Scottish Rights of Way Society exists, fighting for Scottish people's rights to roam the countryside via the rights of way. So it's quite interesting that how much history is in this glen, and it's nice to know that it's played such a pivotal role in giving me and everybody else in Scotland the freedom to be able to be here now, see this video, get out and enjoy the countryside. It's quite funny, I've come out to this wonderful, remote, quiet location in the middle of nowhere, about as remote as you can get in the Cairngorms. And there must be about a dozen people coming just around this corner. It's always a way. Every time you get to the top of a hill, people appear out of nowhere. I know, I can't have it my way all the time. Anyway, I can't moan. It's been a beautiful, beautiful ride. And this is the perfect spot for tea and cake. Cheers! I've made friends. Hello. Hello. Cute. You're so adorable. You're not getting any sandwiches though. The sun's come out and I am heading back the way I came. I'm looking forward to it.